A lot is being made of Chris Eubank Jr. activating his rematch clause to fight Liam Smith again sometime later on this year. The big question is, he might have done that, but does anybody want to see it again? Will the outcome be any different to the one we saw when Smith demolished Eubank Jr.? Liam was on breakfast this morning.
I heard through the grapevine he was still trying to make Eubank and Conor Benn. That might have fell through, so he took his full time. I think he legitimately had till Saturday to take this rematch, and he took the full time to make his decision. Look, I know the build-up got a bit ugly, but I said before, I named me a Chris Eubank Jr. fight that has been respectful and gentleman's in the build-up. So I also say that with his pride, he's got too much pride and too much ego to say, look at the interview at the end. He's about to say the better man won, and he says the better and pulls himself back because he can't bring himself to say it.
I mean, Simon, there'll be a lot of words leading up to it. We know that. Yeah. There was the last time. This will probably be no different. But will the fight itself and the outcome be any different?
I find it difficult to suggest that it will be. I find it difficult to think. What we saw from Chris Eubank was a lack of punch resistance, and that's primarily because of the weight that he was fighting at 160. He's a 168 fighter, 168 pounds. So getting to 160 is going to diminish him. Now, he's only got... He's taken this fight. I think it's an outrage to some extent. Not an outrage. I think it's a liberty that a rematch clause was put in there anyway. And the rematch clause was put in there primarily for a decision that might have been marginal or dubious or debatable, or like George Groves versus Carl Froch stopped too early in certain people's minds. Not in Carl's, but ultimately in certain people around the fight game. This wasn't that. No. This was somebody getting completely knocked out. Yeah. There's no reason behind it. There's no excuse behind it. He can try to bring in the ridiculous idea that it was a deliberate elbow, which has now been removed from the equation. But the tragedy for Chris Eubank is all that I've been saying all along about noise and houses in Las Vegas and who he's going to fight and when he's going to fight for a world title are superseded by performances in the ring when he gets up against opponents that are above a certain grade. The argument I put to Derek Chisora, you're not world class. Well, what's world class? Everyone that beats you every time you step up, right? And so with that in mind, I look at it and say, now, they'll spin a narrative and retribution and revenge and correcting the record and fighting at Anfield for Liam Smith might be a bucket list with a big payday at the end of it. I think there'd be more elegance in Chris Eubank accepting his fate, moving on in his direction, and allowing... I'm not saying support should be made up of elegance, but Liam Smith moving on with his. He's now entitled to perhaps fight for a world title, to perhaps have that spot that the Chris Eubank was advocating was his, or even fighting Charlo at the weight class that he comes from. But Chris Eubank Jr., for me, is a charlatan. I think he's a great media personality. I think he's one of the best people that talk to the media. He's got himself to being one of the most billable, bankable fighters in British boxing without actually winning anything. I mean, and that's remarkable.
Is it a fake?
Well, I think at the level when we get to the point where you're fighting bona fide fighters that have won world titles, name them. Let's name them, shall we? Billy Joe Saunders. Let's name it again. George Groves. Let's name it again. Liam Smith. How did it get on for him? He lost them all. He'll say margins in the fights against Billy Joe Saunders, and he'll say margins against George Groves, and George Groves hits heavier than most of those three fighters put together. But there ain't no margin in Liam Smith loss, is there?
Is Eubank Jr. a charlatan, a fake?
Well, I can only... My knowledge isn't as good as yours or Simon's with the boxing, but my gut feeling is that with this one, the reason he's triggered the rematch is because there's not many better options out there for him that can pay him the same. I don't know. Would that be fair?
Well, there's this horrible, ugly cankersaw of a spectacle that people still seem to want, which is Conor Benn getting back in the ring.
Yeah, but they've obviously exhausted that, haven't they?
Well, maybe they have, maybe they haven't. Ultimately, you're not going to see that on the shores if Robert Smith's to be believed after the discussion that myself and Spencer had yesterday with him on a
Simon,
show.
I tell you what, the public will vote with their feet, and they will soon show one way or t'other whether they want this fight or they don't, this rematch between Smith and Eubank Jr. So we went to a guy still in the fight game, and we think coming back to the fight game, top boxer, Billy Joe Saunders. Did he want to see it?
No, I don't think it excites anybody, obviously apart from him, because he needs to avenge that loss, and rightly so in a way, really, to move forward with anything else. But, I think the 160 limit for him is always going to be his underdog issue in that fight because, he's 33 now, he's he's very fine down at the weight, and 160, I think he's just outgrown it. But nobody wants to see that again, Jim. Realistically, he's earned a few quid now. He's never going to be world champion. He's never going to make it top level. He should just sit back and, go from there, because putting himself back into the firing line at 160 is, one, it's dangerous, and two, we see what we see, and that was it. He's not going to display anything else. If it's it again, it'll be the same outcome, and I believe that'll be with any sort of 160 fighter who's sort of decent, to be fair.
Were you surprised, Bill, by the manner of his defeat in that first fight?
In hindsight, I expected him to win, but look, you can't take Nank away from Liam Smith. He boxed very, very well. He applied the pressure. He done everything he should do, because he's a world level fighter, and he, being in there with another world level fighter brings that little bit more out in yourself, and obviously brought a little bit more out in Liam Smith, thinking obviously Eubank was better than what he actually was, and when he got in there, he thought, you know what, I'll just plough through you, and that's what he done.
Now, I'm going to ask you, what about Billy Joe Saunders? Is there a latest on you? Are we going to see you again, Bill?
At this level now, Jim, I've had the sick of seeing you got these YouTubers, you got all this now, and I want to be in proper fights. I don't want to be in rubbish fights. If they're going to be rubbish fights, I wouldn't bother, because when I come back from Texas and boxed Canelo out there, and then you see the atmosphere and the buzz around these huge fights, you want to be in them. And of course, I understand you've got to be in these fights and you've got to keep winning them, but I'm a world level fighter. So if they're not going to be world level fights, then it's the win, shall I say?
You still feel you can do it at the highest level, Bill, and given the opportunity, you'd show that?
I could do it with the state I'm in now. No, sometimes I sit there and I know I can bounce around for 10, 12 rounds how I am now. So I'll be itching. Once I get down to weight, once I, get fit, start feeling fresh in myself, I'll be bouncing like no tomorrow.
You see, Simon, there you go. If Billy Joe Saunders was to come back, people would want to go and see that and see what re-emerges.
Yeah, I mean, Billy Joe Saunders is an elite fighter. And obviously there's a lot of rancour between Billy Joe Saunders and Chris Eubank. So you're not going to expect him to be a cheerleader for Chris Eubank, are you? Because ultimately Chris Eubank called him out after the fight with some bet that he'd put on about how Billy Joe Saunders was going to bottle it or something. It was all a bit unedifying. Because I think that Billy Joe Saunders put on a very credible performance against Canelo Alvarez, but he had made observations about people quitting, and there was an observation initially about Billy Joe Saunders quitting on his stool. Once we get the evidence, I think he made comments about Daniel Dubois.
Yeah.
And so when the evidence come out about Billy Joe Saunders, he was then, of course, put in the camp of, hang on a second, there's good reason behind it. What he says about Chris Eubank is pretty much in line with what I've said, or I'm in line with what he said, which is he can't fight at 160. It's going to be a challenge for him. He's better at 168. Billy's been gone for a long time now. And it's difficult to see and imagine that he's going to get back in a ring and be as effective as he once was. But he's got the ability to do so. I mean, I think he's put on a fair bit of weight recently.
How old is he now?
Well, I think it'll be early 30s. We'll check it. I mean, he's been
not
around
old
a
for a
bit,
boxer, though, is it?
No,
and he's not got that much mileage on the clock. I mean, obviously, the damage that was done to him in the Canelo Alvarez fight was quite significant.
Yeah.
But I don't think there was psychological...
33.
I don't think there's psychological damage done to him, besides the disappointment of it all. And he is an elite fighter. And a brilliant fighter. And I, for one, would always like to see Billy Joe Saunders in the ring as long as he's safe, because I think he's a stylist. I think he's worth watching. He's a showman.
Yeah.
What goes with Billy sometimes isn't always the greatest.
Yeah.
But notwithstanding that, if he's to get back in a ring at world level, I think it'd make it interesting.
He's watchable, isn't he?
He's
one of those,
watchable.
I don't... There's certain fighters I like watching, and he's one of them.
Yeah. When he was fighting the fellow missed with a huge windmill punch, and Billy was watching for the guy's gloves flying out the arena. He says, I'm not interested in fighting YouTubers. I'm not surprised at that. Such a man is fighting very soon. Jake Paul up against Tommy Fury. We will be all over that, because we were there on the night when the two of them got in the ring, Simon, recently. On the night, Barbetiev was there doing his stuff. And I have to say, it's gathering pace. A lot of people out there talking about Jake Paul up against Tommy Fury. We will be across it. Do not worry about that.